Hi everyone, welcome to the next panel at QED. We're going to be talking about single-use plastics and the ubiquity in everything that we do and everything that we consume, and what problems they're creating in the world and what can we do, if anything, to tackle them. So I'd like to introduce the panel. They're going to introduce themselves individually. So I'll start with Matt.
Hi, I'm Dr. Matt Winning. I work at the UCL Institute for Sustainable Resources, mostly on climate change and circular economy policies. And I'm also a stand-up comedian who was here last year doing a show about climate change. I find it very difficult to talk in front of audiences without people laughing. So if I give up halfway through a sentence, it's just my own nerves or other things. But yeah, very happy to be here.
I'm Dr. Sarah Clement. I'm a researcher at the University of Liverpool. I'm an environmental scientist by background, but my research is primarily on environmental governance and environmental management. So I can really speak to the policy side of things, but I've also worked as a consultant working with companies on their waste management, so I can speak to that as well. And I'm writing a book on governing the Anthropocene, so plastics are quite interesting from that perspective, because the kind of footprint of plastics is one of the markers of when they say the Anthropocene starts, which is kind of this new era where humans have affected the kind of global environment.
I'm Dr. Helen Czerski. I'm a physicist. I work at University College London as well. I study the physics of the ocean, and I've spent, through my research, the research side of my life, I've spent months living and working at sea. I've just come back from 2 months up at the North Pole in the Arctic. And so my contribution here is more on the what's actually happening in the ocean. Where do things go? Where do they get to? What goes where, and what we know about it.
Okay, thank you. So I think I'd like to kick us off by asking, sort of busting some myths really about plastic and what we see in the press. Is there really a big island of trash floating in the middle of the Pacific Ocean?
Well, I guess that'll be my job then. So not one you can see. So one of the reasons marine plastics took so long to come to more general attention is that what tends to happen to plastic in the ocean is that it gets broken down. So UV radiation will work away on the bonds that hold large-scale plastics together. And so a lot of the plastic ends up as small bits. Most of the mass is actually big bits, but they tend to be things like fishing nets, things that boats have thrown overboard to get rid of them, sometimes in response to the Coast Guard coming after them because they shouldn't be fishing somewhere. And so the problem is mostly invisible. There are places where the ocean concentrates plastics. So just because of the movement of water, some plastics, not all plastics, about 60% of plastics are buoyant. So they stay at the surface and then they get carried where the surface water goes. And the movement of the ocean, because the ocean is not just a great big pond, it's constantly moving, basically concentrates them in some places. And the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is one of those places. It's in the middle of one of the ocean gyres. Basically things that it's quite easy for floating material to get in and quite hard for floating material to get out, just because of the way the currents and the winds work. So the Great Pacific Garbage Patch isn't like the sort of pond down the wreck, that there used to be when I was a kid in Altrincham, that there's sort of piled up plastics. It's an area where if you scoop out the water and you start really looking at what's in it, there are a lot of very small plastics. And they are growing, they're increasing with time. They're mostly, and it is just the buoyant ones. That one of the issues with the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, I have very mixed feelings about that label, because on one hand it sends a very strong message, and on the other hand it paints a slightly false picture. It's a bit like WWF selling itself with the pandas, right? It's not really what it's about, but it sends a very useful signal. And the problem with a lot of these small things is that they are the same size as a lot of the things that are naturally in the ocean. So, and that's one of the reasons that cleaning the ocean is nonsense, right? It's too big. Anyone who thinks you can clean the ocean, first of all, has never been to sea and never seen how big the problem is, and also hasn't really realised that the size range of a lot of The most numerous bits of plastic are the small ones, and they are exactly the same size as a copepod or any other small bit of zooplankton which is floating around. And also marine gels. There's a lot of things in the ocean that they're not solid in the way that we understand them. They're kind of squishy, a bit fragile, fragmenting. They're things that are an important part of the ecosystem and the physical environment, but they are sort of a bit nebulous. And the problem is if you filter, you just squish all of that. So the Great Pacific Garbage Patch does exist in the sense that there is one very specific region that is famous and lots of similar ones that aren't famous, where there are lots of marine plastics. But it doesn't exist in the sense of looking like a garbage patch from a human point of view. But it's a worthwhile thinking point, but it's not the only problem. Most plastic comes from the coasts and a lot of it goes back to the coasts, and those are the bits we see.
So it's not like, as you say, it's not a giant bits of significant pieces of plastic where you could almost walk on them. They're very, very tiny pieces that have...
And also very dilute. The way that you do these studies, when you do filter studies, which, is easy. The reason that filter studies are easy is because people have got very good at developing nets to study plankton, which are the natural things in the water. So you use the same nets, and it may or may not be good for plastics, but, it picks up small things. And you have to filter a lot of water to get a jar full of stuff with plastic that we can see. Now, that doesn't mean it's not significant, because you basically get the same amount of biomass. The ocean is a very dilute place. That's the other thing. So a high concentration may not look like much to us, but because the ocean is in general very dilute, it's quite significant in terms of what's normally there.
So I think for a lot of us, we have the perception that a lot of the plastics that are ending up in our oceans are maybe coming from not countries like the UK, where there's a high knowledge of recycling and having an awareness of the damage of plastics in our everyday life, but maybe from countries where they don't have that widespread knowledge. So maybe in Asia or countries like that. But is that really the case? Sarah, would you like to comment on that?
So this is something that came to prominence with this idea that all this plastic is coming mainly from China, Vietnam, Egypt, a couple of other countries, but which is true. It's true that a lot of that leakage, so what they call the plastics that end up in the ocean is leakage. So they've leaked from the normal waste stream. A lot of them come from China, but the problem is we send a massive proportion of our waste to China for recycling, and it just ends up in the ocean. So although it's not necessarily coming from us directly, part of it is our waste. And so what China has done kind of just at the end of last year is they've banned imports of some foreign materials. And so what we've done is, rather than saying, oh, now we have to deal with our plastics waste, we're starting to ship it to other Southeast Asian countries. So it is true that most of that leakage comes from 10 countries that are kind of more developing economies. It's not true that we don't have a role to play in that.
So does the panel think that the UK is complicit in this additional dumping of materials? So, we're asking people at home to recycle and to be diligent in doing that. But do we think that the UK is then complicit in having a contract with these countries where we're sending our recycling supposedly to be recycled? Do we know that it's then just being dumped, essentially? Or, how can we do we have any accountability there?
I think the problem here is that there may not be complicit. Certainly 10 years ago is a very strong word, because people are very good at doing their best in a way that's kind of morally convenient. So if you pay someone else to take the problem away,
indeed,
you win both ways, right? So I do think that as knowledge increases, it does become complicity. And this, in any case, there's all kinds of things further back. Recycling should be the last resort in any case. But it's been obvious for years, So my dad worked at BASF in Cheadle Hulme when I was growing up, and I had to go at him about plastics recycling then, right? And the plastics industry has kind of been trying, and they face this thing of wanting to sell more plastic at the same time as trying to do something about it. And the moral hazard is that everyone just goes, oh, well, we can do something afterwards, right? We can just pay for some kind of thing afterwards and it will all go away. And I think what has changed is that is no longer excusable. We can see the moral hazard. We can see that we have fallen into that trap, and it's not really on anymore. So I think the moral judgment on it has probably changed over time.
Indeed. I think that's the key, because I think, from the UK perspective, we have a high level of household recycling. So, we're prompted to do that. But as you say, that really is the last resort. We should be doing more before we should be reducing the amount that we recycle at home. So what can we do to try and tackle that?
I mean, I think it's important to always remember that there's a distinction between collection and recycling. And so we're very good in the UK at collecting, and as individuals, we can put our plastics to be collected, but I'm not recycling anything. I'm not actually doing that physical action. I don't work for a secondary plastic manufacturing company. And so then it becomes very difficult as an individual. So then we give it to, to be collected, and then the government's making some choice to pass that on to China or now wherever it's, Bangladesh or wherever it's going now. And that becomes a different thing that we are then having as individuals to engage with the government to tell them, well, this is what we're giving you this, but we want it to be done within the UK or the EU or whatever, in terms of actually managing it. So it's difficult as an individual, I think, to feel like you've got much control of that when you're trying your hardest and then you find out that it's actually disappearing to the other side of the world.
I think, it seems like household recycling is really widespread in the UK, but have we become maybe a little bit complacent then in that, we think we're doing our bit by being able to recycle our household waste or have it collected, as you say, Matt. But actually, we're then just, as Helen mentioned before, just passing it off and it's someone else's problem because we're assuming we're doing our bit by, collecting our paper and collecting our plastic. And then that's it. We're not really thinking about it. And we need to really re-engage with the public to, we've come over to the recycling, we've got over the recycling hurdle, but actually there's another challenge there that we need to start focusing on and re-educating people that this isn't enough.
Well, it also depends on the materials. So one of the things about plastics recycling is it's basically not really possible unless you have very clean waste. The energy required, because you're often talking about mixed plastic waste. Most people in this country, even though our bottles have had on the bottom of them, these little triangles with numbers and PE and PP for years and years, when I was a kid, it was obvious that it was there then. You could see what material your bottles were made from. And we've just got worse and worse at mixing materials. And actually, if you're talking about recycling mixed plastic waste, it is almost impossible to do it without huge input of energy. The idea of recycling is actually pretty much a myth, because the other thing, there's that. And the other problem is nobody buys recycled things. There's only a point in creating a recycled product if someone is buying it. And we are very bad at buying recycled products because they're not quite as bright white, for example. They don't last as long, and they're more expensive. And so actually recycling is it's a very nice, convenient thing, but the more you go back down the chain, closer to the consumer, the less tenable it becomes. And it's not a message anyone wants to hear, because it's a lovely idea that if you put it in a bin, it just it goes away and you can be happy.
Can I give a statistic then? So 9% of the plastics that have ever been made, the best estimate that we have, global estimate, only 9% have ever been recycled. So, essentially, because it takes, so long for plastics to degrade, all plastics that have ever been made still exist in some form. So we've recycled 9%. And, you may have nationally higher levels of that now. But if you're looking over the 60 years since plastics production began, we've only recycled 9%. And contamination is something we haven't talked about. That's also a big problem in that people might be putting stuff in the bin for collection, but if there's contamination, then that can have kind of cascading effects and contaminate a load of recycling.
Well, let's pick up on that point then in terms of the limitations then in terms of recycling, that's a good point. So again, coming back to household recycling, what we're doing there, but if people don't wash out their tins, they don't wash out their plastics, how, if that's going to then be collected, that actually might just end up being sent straight to landfill by your local council or the company that's come to collect it. It might not actually go anywhere useful.
Yeah. I mean, what then happens if it's not recycled is the majority goes to landfill or is incinerated for essentially power generation, which then creates more carbon dioxide emission. You know, about half of I think of plastic emissions are actually embedded in it, so would come out at that sort of point in time. Which, you know, neither of those situations are ideal, and you need to have stringent policies around either of those. And given that we then have, you know, other environmental issues like climate change that we're trying to tackle, if plastic demand's increasing and we're using more of that for being incinerated and producing more energy, you're creating just problems on top of other problems. So yeah, it's pretty complicated. I mean, I think what Helen said is really important in terms of the fact that more and more plastics have been mixed together is probably the main difficulty to solve this problem. So I think product design is actually where the main solution is with plastics. Is actually working with people that can, forcing companies and working with companies to make sure that the whole production chain, rather than seeing it as a waste problem, it's a problem throughout the entire production chain that's dealt with a lot earlier, I think, is the only way we can actually solve it. If we think of plastics as this waste thing that happens and that we just have to deal with, then it's never going to be solved because the options that we have are incredible, at present, are incredibly limited.
But the implications then come back up society. So I remember being taken, and I must have been 17 or 18, to a lecture at Manchester University, or whichever version of Manchester University it was back then, and sitting and listening to the guy who designed, you know, those sachets, not the Nespresso ones, but there were sort of sachets with a little nozzle at the top that people put in coffee machines, right? And this was the guy whose PhD had been funded by industry to work out how to stick those layers together. And it was organised by the British Plastics Federation or somebody. And everyone in the room was very impressed at this layering of different types, so you could make it waterproof and do these things. And I just sat there at 18 going, I cannot bear this, right? I hate those things. I hated them then. What is wrong with a kettle and a packet of coffee, right? Yeah. And a lot of so I think the design, it does come back to the consumer. All of this sounds very difficult, far away. Fundamentally, like, I could swear here, I won't. Like, just make some coffee with a kettle. You don't need this thing, right? And I think a lot of the plastic waste has come as we've been sold the consumer society very successfully. And there are some things that consumers can do. And the thing that is hardest to do is to know how to send these messages. Like, I have hated these things my entire life. And sometimes I get to sit on a panel in front of a room of people and tell them how much I hate these things. But in that lecture room at the time, at age 18, as a very shy kid, I was not going to stick my hand up and say, excuse me. But your buying habits are the strongest message you have. And the bigger message is turning away from this overcomplicated little bits of everything for stuff when there's a simpler method. And someone's not going to make as much money at the end of it. But I think that's where that end of it comes back to, is that a lot of the problem comes in what we expect.
So I think there's some issues there we want to probably come back on and expand on a little bit more. But let's have an audience question. If we have one, we'll take a short pause. Yeah. I'm going to throw the cube to you, okay? So you can speak into the cube.
Yeah. One of the biggest problems with the use of plastics is it's an incredibly useful material. And the unfortunate reality is asking people to inconvenience themselves to use less doesn't work very well in reality. Do you think governments are investing enough in developing alternatives that are as good as plastic?
There are some materials, so there are some places, I think, where you are right. The reason the plastics industry grew so fast is because it does a phenomenal job. And certainly in things like medicine, right? You know, I'm wearing contact lenses right now. They are made fundamentally of polymer. There are very important uses of plastic that I think society is never going to do without. But in order to protect those, we have to deal with the crap. And most of it is the crap. So in a way, to start off with, we're kicking into an open goal, because you are right that a lot of plastics are essential. to modern life, but there are also a lot of them aren't. You know, we all get the newsletters we don't want that are wrapped in plastic packaging, right? So much stuff comes wrapped in plastic film, and plastic film's one of those things that is, it's a terrible culprit when it comes to getting into the environment, because it tends to float away and float off. So you are right that plastics are essential, but I think the essential plastics form such a small proportion of the problem that we don't have to worry about that just yet. You know, there are things, and allergens, you know, protecting people who have allergies from certain, you know, being able to sell something with sesame in it next to something that doesn't have sesame in it. And, you know, there are uses where it's important, but there's a big open goal. I don't know, you two know more about policy than
well, there's so the UK has the Plastics Pact, which was like led by some companies and the UK government. And I wanted to look up the number. So they announced 20 million for plastics innovation. I don't actually think that that's that much. 20 million doesn't sound like that much to me. But they have these like really ambitious targets that they want to have have all plastics to be recyclable or compostable by 2030. That's the EU-wide goal. They've got the 2025 for the UK Plastics Pact. I think a lot of this is actually driven by companies who are getting pressures from their consumers. But I think they're doing enough? I don't think so. I think they have set some really ambitious targets. I think that importantly, there's a lot of momentum at the moment, because there's like the circular economy package that was just released in the EU. The UK is like really paying attention to it. I think it's just like keeping them accountable to the promises and kind of pushing for more. I think that like we're in what would be called like a policy window at the moment where we could effectively target it.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. We're very much at a time where there's a buy-in from consumers and government and companies to start changing things and start putting in policies in place. So yeah, now is absolutely the right time to do stuff about it. In terms of whether there's a lot, your other point was like, is the government making enough investment in alternatives or other? I mean, some simple ones I think are, you know, there's a lot of talk of different cities bringing back water fountains, for instance, which is like this really simple, you don't need investment into those things for them to happen. You know, we've done this in the past. It's just, yeah, I think some investment in scaling up secondary recycling and plastic production would be useful at a UK or an EU sort of level. But beyond that, I think a lot of it's already, you know, the sort of solutions that we have, whether it's product design or whether it's demand reduction or whatever it is, sort of out there already. And
that's one of the reasons, actually, sorry to interrupt, that the plastics thing came along this year, right? We have known about this problem for decades, and that's not an exaggeration. But what happened this time when Blue Planet 2 came around, is that there were things people could do. And that was the difference, is that people have been working for 20 years on, you know, those things, these things, you know, there were already things people can do. And if you look at the history of environmental problems, the ones people latch onto are the ones they can actually do something about. Yeah. So actually, there has already been a lot of investment in paper alternatives. I went to a cafe down the road to have lunch just now, paper straw. And so they actually, the reason the issue has come up just now isn't because it's actually any different now than it was 2 years ago. It's because solutions already exist and people can do something. And so it's easier to get people to buy into it because it can happen now. You can do it tomorrow instead of, you know, voting in some number of years' time.
Can I say one thing about the behavior? So from a policy perspective, because you did mention, you know, people don't really want to do it. Yeah. The cold, hard reality is if you look across the literature on behavior change, education has a marginal effect on behavior, almost nothing. Most of the social marketing campaigns where we try to get people to change their behavior have a 5 to 10% effect over time, because even if you get, say, a 25% reduction in plastic at first, people's use keeps creeping back up. So I think that the alternatives just need to be easy for people rather than people having to make the conscious choice all the time. The fact that if you go to the cafe and it's just a paper straw, it's much more hopeful, like long-term way to do it than expecting people to think about their choice every single time.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think we're going to keep to time, I think we're going to keep some questions to the end. So you'll have plenty of time to ask your questions, but just so we can cover everything we want to. I think, Matt, you touched on it earlier in terms of, it's been mentioned circular economy and what that means in terms of organisations perhaps trying to tackle the way of thinking or the way that they're manufacturing. So I know that's your area.
Yeah, yes, one of them. I mean, I came into this fairly recently, really only over the last few years when it started getting a bit of traction in academia and other places because people like the sound of it. Essentially, it's just recycling and reusing and doing other things, but it's in company speak. So if you say the circular economy, people go, oh, wow, that sounds great. But it's things we've known about for a long time. And it's rather than that linear process of production where you have extraction at one end and then sort of waste at the other, it's just sort of making it more circular, the production structure, and looking at where there are benefits to companies from doing that and overall to society. So, I mean, I will probably end up looking at plastics in more detail. I know there's a few reports out there from an economics point of view and the benefits that might accrue. My expertise, I've spent the last 3 years looking at steel, iron and steel, and what we can do globally in terms of reducing emissions, but also using more secondary steel productions. Think about roughly about 30% of steel is globally produced by sort of secondary productions, whereas plastics is a lot lower starting point, something like 9-10% or whatever is recycled. So I think there's a lot that can be done with plastics. Whether there's a benefit overall, though, I think at an aggregate level, probably everything will be the same. I think there'll be some companies that will benefit from being able to improve, the types of techniques, and there's definitely innovation out there and that sort of thing. And then some people will lose out from it. I think at a net level, it'll probably just be a good environmental benefit to society if we do it right, which is a good enough reason to do anything. So I think trying to frame things in a circular economy way is just a good way of getting much more buy-in from governments and industry, but it's not really a new idea. It's just the idea that we can make our economy more efficient by sort of tying the ends together to it, which I think is a nice way to look at it.
Yeah. I asked my mother for stories about this because my mom's the global environmental manager for DuPont. So they have a lot of this stuff that they're doing. What it seems like from their perspective that is the benefit, and this is why the industry speak thing is quite important, is that, say, resins and plastics that they would have to use in the paint making process previously, that they would have just thrown out, they can now sell to companies. And they even have waste products now that they can sell to companies who are kind of combining all of their waste products together and making new products out of it. So whereas they used to have to pay for that waste to be shipped away, they're now having companies that are buying it and making new things for it. So for them, there's a complete incentive to do it.
Great example. Yeah.
And I think that's part of it, is that, waste management has when you buy something, you only pay for one half of the process. I think more and more people are going to be penalized in some way for not reusing waste or not being efficient, and that will also drop. And the other thing is things are going to become more expensive. That there is a habit now of having stuff, and there are also always trade-offs. Once you've dealt with your open goal, then you're looking at trade-offs. You're looking at this jumper, for example, is 100% wool, and I bought it because I paid an unreasonable amount of money for a jumper, frankly, so that it wasn't made of plastic. Now, I'm privileged enough to be able to do that. But fundamentally, if you're not going to make things out of plastic and you still want a thing, and I don't buy many clothes, but you then have to make it out of something else, right? So I'm vegetarian. How do I deal with the ethics of wool? Do I like the way sheep are being kept? There's always some other trade-off somewhere. There's no perfect solution. The bigger answer here is that we need to look at our relationship with stuff, have fewer things and value the ones that we have. But there is no, plastics is an obvious bogeyman because it lasts so long. Leather maybe doesn't, wool maybe doesn't. It's going to biodegrade. So do I choose the thing which is, more water intensive now or more energy intensive now, or the thing that's not going to still be around in 10,000 years time? There's no perfect solution to any of this. That's something society doesn't want to accept, because if you can just do something else, then we can all carry on. But we are really now at the point where we can't just do something else. You either have not to have a new jumper, or you have to accept that jumper has other consequences. It's all very grim, really. But actually, it's nicer, because one of the things I think that's happening in society is that we need to value a small number of things more. It's all connected. The consumer society is all connected up with sort of a consumer mentality that we take things and throw them away. And actually, one of the things about being happier in life is having less and appreciating it more. If a friend hand makes something for you and gives it to you, then that means a lot more. And you have fewer things like that, but they mean more. And one of the things I think we need to work on, and my colleague at UCL, Mark Miodownik, is very keen on, is people appreciating things, putting craft into one object and appreciating what it is, rather than just having lots of things for their own sake. And there was a panel here before on mental health, and it sort of feeds into that. The more we don't need the stuff, quite a lot of it. We do need some things that we relate to, but we can appreciate them more. So it all gets a bit philosophical, but that's the good bit. What I was saying is that actually I think that's the good news story that comes out of it, that using less and reducing what we use and appreciating what we have more actually makes society healthier. So it's not this big bad bogeyman, we're all being told off and we have to pay penance for the sins of the past. We probably do, but we actually maybe get to live in a better way because of it. Which sounds a bit new agey, but I think I would say there's merit to that argument.
I think that basically that point is that you can't buy your way to a better world. So you can't necessarily just buy everything that you're buying now in a different form. But also I wanted to highlight the thing that you kind of mentioned in passing, but maybe everyone doesn't know. So when your clothes are made, like a lot of clothes have plastics in them. And a big source of microplastics is actually when you wash your clothes. So that is something kind of additional that you have to think about. But by buying fewer clothes and buying them made out of different materials, natural materials, then you will have less of an impact. So that's something kind of practical that you can do, is like actually look at the materials that are bought. You can also wash your clothes less as well. And there are kind of products that you can buy that you can put your clothes in bags that kind of trap the microplastics. So there are kind of practical things that you can do to stop that particular one. Because when I found out about the clothing and plastics one, I was just like, where does it end?
I think my favorite thing about policy, so there's the 5, here we now have a charge on plastic bags, which I think is great. It means I now don't have a drawer full of plastic bags in my house. And that's definitely my favorite thing about what's happened. There's like a drawer I can just use again for other things. Like, wow, this is
my
great.
drawer is full of those cotton bags.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was about to say. So there's a statistic out there that says that you would have to use a tote bag about 131 times to make it as environmentally efficient as using a plastic bag, from certainly a carbon dioxide point of view. So you have to I've had a keep cup, like I lost it like a month ago or something like that, and I don't think I managed to actually get the sort of lifetime savings out of it, and I've had to buy another one. I know. But it's just, it's difficult. I think small policies like that, though, like a 5p bag or whatever, is once there's enough of those sort of things introduced, I think people begin to appreciate the benefits that it has to them and to society as a whole. But it's hard to see because you then don't see the amount of saving that's happening as an individual. So I think more good news stories around those sorts of things, or how much are we actually reducing, needs to come out more and be talked about a bit more. I think that would be useful.
So if you mentioned, Sarah, before from DuPont and how they sort of change their stance, but it seems that maybe large companies, they might only engage with the impact that they have if it's still a financial benefit to them, rather than doing the right thing because they're a big company and they can invest in that money and they can make those changes. It's more sort of, what they're getting out of that scenario. So if companies aren't incentivized to do it out of the greater good, or policy from governments is too slow to force change on them, perhaps. Although, you know, the 5p bag change probably has had quite a good impact. But there's the issue of, again, complacency. We all do that now, but then there's perhaps a plateau of where that becomes useful, and what's the next thing that people have to do. So,
but if you speak to people in companies, sorry, I'm interrupting a lot, I'm very rude. If you actually speak to people at the top of those companies, they say, we are trying to reduce plastics because our consumers are forcing us to.
Yeah.
And that's why being a consumer, and even if you still have to buy the thing, kick up a stink about it. And they are listening, and that's what you hear. They say it's not government regulation, it's not finances, it's that they know that consumers can choose. And, you know, is it Iceland that's promised to go plastic free by some date quite in the relatively near future? You know, probably both.
I think the company.
It's the company, the supermarket. But they get good publicity from doing it, and so I think you don't have to wait.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the really big companies are beginning to do this now just because they feel like they'll be judged too much. I mean, McDonald's and Coca-Cola are both, you know, Coca-Cola, I think, creates something like 100 billion plastic bottles a year or something like that. And but people saying it, well, you know, this is unacceptable, we need to stop this. I find it really annoying when I read people on Twitter complaining about things, but it actually might be the way to start making changes in the world if enough people start complaining about stuff.
Yeah, the research on boycotting does show that actually the companies that are saying that they're doing something, it's if you notice that they're being hypocrites and you call them out on it, the brand damage that does actually have an impact. So, I mean, even when companies do say they're doing the right thing, you kind of can still hold them to account by being vocal, maybe on Twitter or...
And keep it up as well, because if you speak to government policy people, the thing that they say is, we have this window in government now where ministers are all interested in plastics and keen to put in regulations, but it's not going to last because there's going to be another big political football that comes along in 6 months or a year or 2 years. We don't know how long we've got, basically. So in some ways, the best thing you can do is not forget about this issue. Kick up a stink now and keep remembering to do it, because the longer it goes on, the change goes on while people are making a fuss. So make fuss for as long as possible, because there'll be some other great disaster that everyone's talking about soon, right? And we need to on this issue, we need to make hay while the sun is very definitely shining.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite telling. So plastic is a very visual environmental problem, so that's why we started with a question about whether there's a big, garbage patch in the sea, because people have these images, or we go to the beach and we see it and it stays with us. And so, as you say, the government's willing to jump on this just now. It's very of the moment, whereas we had, the IPCC report come out last week, and basically no government minister, apart from one or two, has really commented on it at all. The fact that climate, the terrible news from that. But that's because the public aren't really, people are don't want to talk about it very much, and because it's not right there in front of us and we're not able to remember it as much. So I think plastic has that, as an environmental issue, benefit of being a very visible environmental harm that a lot of other ones don't have. So yeah, good for it in that way, but also I wish some other environmental harms were as at the forefront of the public's mind at the moment.
I just wanted to pick up on that in terms of, holding companies to account, or holding brands to account, because, I think we're in a culture now where it's very easy to complain directly at a company if we've received a poor service, or anything like that, received goods that are not the quality we expected. But actually, we might not go out of our way to interact with companies and hold them to account on this issue. So, Marks and Spencer are a good example. They have a plan A. They're quite... they communicate that with their customers. A lot of this is an environmental plan that they have about sourcing 100% of electricity from renewable sources, that kind of thing, the reduction in packaging in their food and the food halls. And as Sarah said about, they're very visible in what they're trying to do, so we can keep on pushing them to make sure that we're holding them to a standard. But what about other companies that don't necessarily have that visible environmental plan in place?
I think some of it comes along the way because there's an economies of scale thing. which is where the economics comes from, right? And if there are some companies that are investing now in packaging, for example, that does a job and then biodegrades, then those products are available for other people effectively. Even if you're pushing on the ones that listen, you are probably helping along the ones that don't. But then we're a small country, we're a small country in a big world, and you can do your bit, but sometimes that's all you can do.
Indeed.
Yeah, I think that the advantage of having some companies that are leading it, and the UK has kind of adopted this practice of having industry-led pacts and that sort of stuff on plastics, is that even the lagging companies eventually will start doing it if it becomes more of an industry norm. So Marks and Spencer's is a bit more of a highbrow shop. And then maybe, if that's true, that Iceland is going to go plastics free, like that's massive, because that's on the complete other end of the scale, and that's quite encouraging. But I think, as you say, that it becomes more available for other companies to do something about it. But that doesn't mean also we should still be holding, we can still interact with those other companies that haven't, we can actually point to them, actually, your competitors are doing something about this. Why aren't you?
Indeed.
So I tried to have a quick look into where the main sectors are that plastics are used into. So packaging is about 40%. I think this is in the EU, so it's just EU numbers. Packaging is about 40%. Buildings are about 20%. We use plastics in buildings. Electronics equipment's about 6%. Automobile, like cars and stuff, is about 9-10%. And then there's just like 25% is just sort of other stuff. So, I guess it's important as well. We think about packaging a lot, but, building more efficient homes and thinking about how cars are using a lot more, because cars are trying to get lighter as well. They're using a lot more plastics, and whether we want to use steel versus plastics or whatever when we're building cars, there are trade-offs. It's not like if you buy a car, you're probably contributing something, and it just depends what type of car you buy and how it's produced, and it might be lighter and therefore more fuel efficient. It's just very complicated, and so as a consumer, making in terms of regulation, making those choices as simple and as clear for consumers as possible is such an important thing to do, because people feel confused or they find it difficult to engage with this sort of stuff when there's so much information out there, and any decision you make can be harmful in some sense. So I think we just need more we have efficiency standards and stuff for a lot of goods now, and I think it just needs to go even further. Their environmental standards need to be attached to pretty much everything that we buy, whether it's food or whether it's plastics or whether what is the environmental harm as much as possible on these things.
So I think what we're saying basically is that as consumers, we just have to be really, really careful. We have to take on that responsibility ourselves to make sure that we're being considerate in our decisions, and we're holding companies to account at all times where possible.
And individuals, you'd be nice about it, but if you walk into a cafe and you get given a plastic fork to eat a piece of cake with, I'm sorry, but I'm not civilized enough to want a fork to eat a cake at any time of day. I don't need the extra delay. But the point is that you just hand it back. Don't accept it. Those are the little things. Just say, it's all right, bit of extra plastic, don't need that. Don't have a go at them. But just those little things, and be nice and polite. But just make it clear that you don't want this plastic fork, you don't need it. I've got a reusable one I carry around with me. It's a bit easier to wash than the normal ones. And just say, no, I've got my own fork, it's all right. And those, because then you're sending a message to other individuals who then had a face-to-face conversation with someone about it, who'll then have a face-to-face conversation with their manager. Goes, all these weird people walking in, don't want the forks. That is really something that we can all do, and embarrass the hell out of anybody who gives out plastic water bottles at events. That then you don't bother being nice. Just get rid of it. It's not necessary. Really, move on.
I'm glad to say there aren't any plastic water bottles at QED.
Well, we should actually thank Helen for this, because it was partly you saying to Mike when you were saying to whoever handed you a plastic water bottle last year, why are you giving out plastic water bottles? And this kind of prompted this panel this year, and it prompted these, and it prompted the metal trolley coins that you got that aren't plastic. It prompted the sandwich containers that are made out of cardboard. They went and bought those themselves. What's it? The paper bag. So your rudeness about actually had an impact, and I mean I think that it's a good point. You will all do a much better job of being polite when you're refusing plastic than I will, because automatically my accent makes me sound rude. So.
Okay, well, I think we're running out of time, so let's take some questions from the audience. So, Andy, would you like to pass the cube? Yes, gentleman here.
As much of a rant as anything, touching on really mainly what Helen was talking about, is the use of paper. I'm very old and was born in Didsbury, and over 50 years ago, you go in, you buy stuff, 2 slices of ham, they slice 2 slices of ham onto a piece of paper, 2 ounces of cheese onto a piece of paper, fresh fish on a piece of paper, no waste. And what you were talking about, Matt, metal, you want to go and buy 2 screws out of B&Q. No, it's a packet of 20 wrapped in plastic.
Yeah.
So straight in the bin, 2 screws is what you're going to use. And it needs to be a global solution, though, not just something that's confined to even Europe. Well, if we're still in Europe. But yeah.
I mean, just to respond to it, I mean, I'm 50% of the way with you. Absolutely on the screw. You know, people want individual things. It's so difficult to get, and that's such a simple solution. On the food stuff, actually, plastics have saved something like 50% of food waste globally over the last, I don't know how many years, because things can be kept fresher using plastic. And that's one of the very good uses of plastic, as well as in hospitals, has been reducing the amount of food waste. And so, I think if you're buying locally and things are definitely going to be fresh, then that's a great case. But then in some instances, actually, plastics have been really useful to stop a lot of waste in terms of food. Exactly, yeah. Well, that's the...
I think we're running out of time, so we're going to quickly try and squeeze in a couple more questions. So, yes.
Sure. My question's about the rule of unintended consequences and who's actually joining up the thinking. So 2 examples. First one is demonising single-use plastics. Everyone's trying to push cups for life. So everyone's got 4 or 5 cups for life and 10 bags for life in their cupboard, which at some point are going to go in the bin. Was that worse than saying, well, until we get a better solution, we'll just keep using disposable, but we'll use it like more? And the second one is like biodegradable plastic. So people are saying, right, this is compostable. I'll buy it, I'll put it in the bin. But a lot of them need like a high temperature industrial grade composter to actually do that. So if you buy it and say it's all right, put it in the bin, it still goes to landfill. So who's joining up the thinking on these policies?
I don't know that anyone is joining up the thinking. I mean, you're absolutely right that is a problem. There are some facilities that exist for disposing of those compostable plastics that you're talking about. It's very difficult to know about the question around the 5 bags for life and 5 keep cups or whatever. You'd have to do a full life cycle assessment. I don't know if I've ever seen one of those, but it's hard to say, and it depends on which thing you're talking about, because there's also the corn-based plastics and the question of, yes, they do reduce carbon emissions even if you're making them with conventional energy sources, but I'm a biodiversity researcher, and corn is extremely problematic for ecosystems. So I don't know that there is any one person joining up the thinking, but I think that there are certainly, there's a drive towards these more holistic interdisciplinary research projects, which may contribute to that in the future. But I don't know if you have other thoughts.
No, I mean, I think it's a really interesting point, and I we'll try and look into that a bit more. I think there's definitely a research area for this at the moment, and I think the government are willing and funding bodies are actually willing to fund a lot more on this to understand what those sort of joining up points could be.
I have two answers to that. One is don't buy the other 4 cups for life.
Yeah, well, that's...
And the other is that it's such a long day. I've just forgotten the other one. The biodegradable plastics are not biodegradable. I mean, they've been around for a long time. Like I said, my dad worked in the plastics industry all the time, for his whole career. And I remember him coming home with the first recyclable plastic golf tees because it was decided that was the place to start. Because if anything was because the idea was golfers put them in the ground and forgot them, right? So that was the test case. If they were going to biodegrade, that was almost the best case you could have because it's a small amount. You stick it in some soil out in if that doesn't biodegrade, nothing's going to biodegrade. There's probably a lot of them still around, I reckon. So the biodegradable plastic, the problem is that is an example of moral hazard. We're just going to basically pretend we've solved the problem without having to change our behaviour. And actually, it's all about behaviour change. And the actual point I wanted to make about the cups was that I think the reason the keep cups are useful is they serve a very important function as a reminder in people's everyday lives that this is a thing that they care about. And, I think there's a parallel with it's a bit of a left turn at traffic lights, but with the Apollo space program and the money that was spent on that, right? And you can argue about whether or not it was worth it. But I have met so many scientists and engineers who do completely different areas of science who were inspired by Apollo, who do genuinely completely different things. And I used to think that the moon landings probably weren't financially worth it, but I think now, even if you just look at their impact on the number of people that got into science because of them, they were worth it. And I think the keep cups serve that purpose. They're a daily reminder that this is a thing that you care about, and then maybe you'll see more of it. So I think that there are other benefits besides life cycle analysis, but try not to lose them and buy the other 4.
It might have the same. There is research on people signing pledges, and pledges can actually work to change your behavior, and that's kind of what that is. Because when you sign a pledge, you shouldn't just sign a pledge. You should also print it out and put it up, and that it's almost like that's your pledge. So.
Okay, well, I think I'm really, really sorry, but we're going to have to leave it there. So to keep the sessions running on time. So thank you, everybody, for coming. And thank you for Matt, Sarah, and Helen.